Okay, I'm Liz Watkins. And we will begin shortly. I would just introduce our speakers and say that the session will be recorded. So if you're not speaking or asking questions, we ask that the cameras and mics are switched off. There will be a 20-minute presentation from Brett about the book with some examples of images, maybe film clips. And then we'll invite our invited respondents, Josh Yumibe and Lucy Fife Donaldson, to lead the discussion. There'll be a chance for more general questions and answers at the end, and we will have your questions ready. I shall introduce our respondents. So leading the discussion will be Lucy Fife Donaldson, who is a senior lecturer in film studies at the University of St Andrews. She's the author of Texture in Film and editor of Movie, a journal of film criticism. Her award-winning audiovisual essay work has included those on Technicolor advisor George Hoynigan-Hune and Joshua Yumibe. He is a professor in film studies at Michigan State University. He is the author of Moving Colour and co-author of Fantasia of Colour in Early Cinema, and more recently Chromatic Modernity with Sarah Street. Josh also recently co-edited Global Film Colour, The Monopack Revolution at Mid-Century with Sarah Street. So the respondents bring their expertise to the discussion with Bregt Lameris, who is senior lecturer at the Department of Digital Culture, Innovation and Communication, Open University in the Netherlands. She researches and teaches on digital transition and the experience of cultural heritage, stigma in media, clothes and identity, disability studies and culture. Her colour research took shape through the University of Zurich, where she worked on the ERC Advanced Grant Project Film Colours. In 2017, Brett published her monograph, Film Museum Practice and Film Historiography, which is available open access through Amsterdam University Press. Today, Brett will speak about her new book, which has just been published by Open Book Publishers, and it's titled Feeling Colour, Chromatic Embodiment in Film Culture, 1950s to 1960s. Welcome, and I shall hand over to Brett.
Thank you so much. Let me try to get this sharing game right. And try to not mess this up. And then hopefully, no. Yes. Can you see the presentation well? I don't hear anybody, so it will be okay, I guess.
Everything looks great, Brett.
Okay, yeah. Wonderful. I still can't see my notes, so I'll be improvising. Yes, thank you very, very much for this invitation, Vicky, Liz, and Sarah. And thank you also very much for responding, Josh and Lucy. It's a great honor to have you all being so interested in my book on color and film, of course, and emotions, affect, so called Feeling Colour, Chromatic Embodiments in Film Culture. And I focused on the period 1950s and 1960s because it's just a very exciting period in color film history. So the contents of the book kind of, after an introductory chapter with the theoretical framework, basically combining affect studies, the history of emotions, and oh, there's somebody coming in, sorry. And historical methodology to look at embodied phenomena in the history. I basically follow, in the book, I follow certain ways of how color and the body are or are believed to interact. And I will discuss this a bit more after first explaining in a nutshell what the introduction is about. So I kind of approach color as a biocultural phenomenon, and I follow there the methodology as laid out by Fernand Braudel in La Méditerranée et Le Monde méditerranéen à l'époque de Philippe II, I guess. It's like 3 big volumes on the history of the Mediterranean, and the first book is about what he calls the first layer of historical transition, which is the quasi-immobile biological layer. So for him it's about environment, about the Alps and the sea, and how that interacts, and how these kind of constraints produce a certain what happens in history. And I kind of translated that for color to the biology of the eyes, the neurological system, the brain that also slowly changes but really constrains the way we are connected and related to color and film, of course. So in the second layer would be the slowly changing cultural context. So what people, how they cultivate their vegetables or whatever in the Braudel book. And for us, slowly changing cultural context, larger discourses on, for example, how color might or might not influence our physiology, beliefs about that, discourses about that, color theories, etc. Slowly changing cultural background of the 50s and 60s. And then the third layer, rapidly changing events. So one king is there, and this happens because this person kind of set certain events in motion. For Braudel, it's really about people and communities. And for this book, it's about the cultural kind of shifts in a briefer period, such as the 50s and 60s, because within the 50s and 60s, we already see quite a lot of things happening and shifts occurring with regard to how color is being used and perceived. And further, and somebody has the microphone on, I think, so it's kind of background sound. Yeah. And then there's the thing like what I call archival complications, of course. Every film is different. Also so not only every film title, but also every version of a film title, every print basically is different. I have several examples for that. For example, from this film, the Hallucination Image du Monde Visionnaire, by my favorite director from the period, Éric Duvivier, who was a semi-professional director who worked for the pharmaceutical industry and made some really amazing films on hallucinations and imaginaries, etc. But as you can see here on the left, you have camera material, which is definitely very different from the material as it was kind of like projected at the time. And this will even change more throughout the time, or when we put this on video, as we did in the 80s and 90s, or now on the DVD, the colors will change. The kind of like the way kind of the purple becomes almost black, and etc. But what we still do recognize very much are the contrasts, the way the colors kind of like connect to each other or not. And so mostly my observations are based on how these colors kind of relate to each other, how they contrast, how they are put in the image, following the maybe contrasts of Itten, but also a bit beyond that, of course. So archival complications, that is. So the first part, stirring up the eye with color. It's about the color perception as a physiological phenomenon and how that can be traced back into art and cinema. And I have an example of one film that a certain reviewer pointed out to me, which for me very well kind of illustrates this part, because it's about how the light stimuli color, black, white, black light, kind of directly sets in motion the neurological system through, starting with the eye and then just going through into the body and turning that stimulus into a color perception. And that can be in all kinds of ways, influenced through the use of these contrasts. So in this part, I elaborate more on this phenomenon of the contrast and the use of contrasting colors in film. And actually, The Flicker by Conrad is a film that is part of what I will talk about later, but the art cinétique kind of the use of artistic objects to really work with the perception, our perceptive apparatus, let's say, our physiological ways of producing and reproducing colors. So the first chapter in this part, or the second chapter in this part, which would be the third chapter in the book, is about how colors follow up, which is called successive colors. So it's also, for example, as we already see in tinting and toning, the contrast between, for example, blue and orange, which happens a lot, is a strong kind of waking up combination, because blue produces already kind of an orange after image, which makes the orange even stronger whenever you switch from blue to orange and the other way around. But there's also all kinds of examples where this is still used in the 50s and in the 60s, because these contrasts are just so effective. And I also discuss, for example, the sudden appearance of very white, very clear and bright image in a film, kind of also directly shocking the eye and stirring up the nervous system. Huh? And then the fourth chapter of the book, so the third chapter of this part, is about how simultaneous color also found its way into film. Simultaneous color is like also a way of simultaneous contrasts, contrasting colors in one image, really used a lot in painting and in what I already call the op art, optical art, so a form of art that uses very much kind of like the perception, the way we perceive, and stimulates that in a strong way to produce certain effects. And we find that back in cinema, but we also find lots and lots of examples of op art basically back in the films. So let's go to the second part. It's already 10 minutes, so I have to hurry a bit. The second part is about color psychologies, and basically this is also this part of this larger, slowly changing perspective. So the first one, how the eye is stirred up, etc., is basically very much leaning onto the more quasi-immobile, but still kind of, and there you see the event. How do you work with that quasi-immobile physiological system? And so this part is about color psychologies, the belief that the colors influence the body. And this is very much also leaning on Faber-Buren, who was basically somebody who used color and all kinds of beliefs on color and how colors produced or got meaning or were appointed meanings to sell paint and sell his services, basically. So he would say you have to paint your room in a blue or a green to create comforting and not too stressful environment, or he would advise people how to paint their restaurant to produce appetite. It's also about the functional colors that you probably know about. So it's about red warning and the green being a safety and whatever. And it's and Faber Buren also kind of like, yeah, he wrote these huge books about how to paint your house, how to paint your hotel, how to paint your restaurant, how to paint your hospital, how to decorate your factory by, let's say. So we can also find this in film. Here we have Bachelor in Paradise, and I find that a very good example of how this Buren discourse found its way into cinema and into the way these houses are shaped, basically also following the personality of the characters in the films. But on the image in the left upper corner, you already see how yeah, this idea of color consciousness, color psychology is laid out in the film. It's really there, like something that is being used to decorate and think about how to decorate the houses. And then we go into one of the houses of the film and we see how there is at the first, in the first side, there is a living room that is quite neutral and nice. And then the cupboard is opened and you have a bar that really shows us very contrasting colors, kind of like leading up to the state of intoxication that you are allowed to whenever it's Friday, I guess, around this time. And so you change your living room into a bar, basically, and the colors that go with that, the colors that go with intoxication, starting by drinking on Friday. Then the other chapter is about colored light. And I have two examples of colored light here. One in a film from Tati. It's from a part that is called like the effects of color and warm and cold. And here you see very well illustrated how this idea that red is warm is directly illustrated in the acting of the ladies here. So Tati lights a red lamp and they start like being, oh, it's so nice and warm and so comfortable. And then I end this chapter with this still from Funny Face, where and that is basically really a film that goes from a palette of very strict functional ways and a play with that kind of colors towards this image where all the colors are mixing in colored lights, and it's kind of like also a way towards where we end in the 60s, the psychedelics, and yeah, kind of like the unleashing of the colors into kind of all ways of, yeah, fantastic combinations, and that you would not expect normally in the street or in, yeah. So the third part is about touching and tasting in color. And here I basically elaborate on cross-modal perception. So another word would be synesthesia, maybe, although synesthesia might be a bit more specific, based or to the direction of hearing color and seeing sound. And cross-modal perception is basically about all the senses mixing up and being connected in ways. So this is also just kind of like why we can enjoy a film just by watching food. We can enjoy kind of like imagining that we can eat it and taste it, or seeing something that is smooth or nice, and we can almost feel it because of this cross-modal principle. And the examples are, for example, from Playtime, where we see how the green light from a pharmacy cross in Playtime turns the food absolutely disgusting, and you see how the person from the drugstore is looking at his food and really thinking like, what happened to this nice, I think it's a nice red apple on a plate. I don't know why he would put an apple on a plate, but well. And he puts it in the white light and looks at it more like it's nice, and then in the green light, and what happened to my apple? And then afterwards you see Tati and the other men that you see entering the image here look at their food and really not enjoying it anymore, because the color has affected the perception of and the apparently taste also of the food. And that's a play with how color has an influence on our way of tasting. And another image of how color influences the way we get an appetite for something foodie on the screen is from Daisies, Semikrashki. I don't know how you pronounce it in Czech, but yeah. Daisies, a wonderful film. Everybody should go and see it. It's all about food, and it plays with food, and it plays with food in color and food in black and white, and the differences in effect when you see the same food in color or in black and white. And here it plays with how time passes, of course, but also how something very appetizing like watermelon, after a trip to the country, they come back and then it has turned into something really not very appetizing. And the colors, basically, when you look at the image plane, the colors indicate this is not appetizing anymore because it is rotten and molded. So yeah, this of course for me shows the important role of color in whether or not we consider something to be appetizing or not. And then the touch part, which is in itself not necessarily related to color, but color kind of gives a certain extra to, for example, this fluffiness of the furs that Barbarella, I use Barbarella a lot because there's so much haptic going on in Barbarella. And here it's just after she discovered having sex the normal way, so not with a pill, as she was used to apparently, or is used to in the future. And she kind of becomes entirely haptic. Her entire body starts to be feeling, and this is indicated by this yellowish, brownish, sepia. What is it? Color, warm color, combined with the furs and the softness of it. And another example is from La Prisonnière, when you see an example of how natural colors, or in this case, the wood with the tar, of course, on it, but the wood and the rusty iron is rough, has rough textures, rough surface, which is often represented in natural kind of colors like brownish, etc. And then in contrast with the coat worn here by, I forgot the character's name, but it's not the main point here. The coat worn by the main male character from the film, which is a very slick surface and with a saturated red, indicating fakeness in a way. So contrasting the human fakeness, whatever, and also indicating he's not really at his place here. So the coda is about the hallucinating colors, which is another kind of like step into the body. It's about really the colors produced by the body when being intoxicated or not, or when dying in a spaceship, as in a Space Odyssey. Although this scene, it was by the viewers from the 60s basically called in the popular it was called the trip. So people saw it as a trip, and they would be experts by experience, I guess, in the 60s, especially when they would specifically go there to relive such a trip or whatever. And as you know, the 60s and end of the 50s was really the time for LSD to be booming. First kind of like accepted and also used as a medical supply or for medical reasons, and then becoming kind of like the discourse around it turned around, like it's dangerous, it's subversive, and also kind of the people who used it started to become kind of a psychotic army or so, trying to also change society. So there's this unleashing of color that you can see here very clearly that I already announced with regard to Funny Face, unleashing of color to also that also kind of resonates with this these revolutions going on in the second half of the 60s, feminism, the March on Washington, the racism, the movement against racism, the sexual revolution, and everything that was going on. And everything was kind of like shifting and moving, and you can see that in the color aesthetics of the time. So that was what I, in a nutshell, wanted to tell you about the book. I have much more to say, of course. I kind of constrained myself a bit to the format of the book, but maybe with the discussion we will go beyond that a bit. And before I finish, I wanted to say something about the wonderful publisher, Open Book Publishers, because not only did they publish my book in open access, they also do that in a diamond format. And a diamond format means that they do not charge any book processing costs or fees, nor do they charge, of course, the readers to read it. They have another financing system that goes through the libraries, through the institutions, and this way they want to democratize the academic publishing field by also allowing people who are, for example, not at a university, and I guess that group will be growing over the coming, I don't know. We don't know what will happen. So maybe there will be many more who cannot afford to pay these APCs and these BPCs. So the Diamond also offers such people, such academics outside of academia, possibilities to publish their book in academic presses in open access, but also people from the global south who might have not as large budgets for open access publishing as we in Western Europe and the United States used to have, and also Eastern European scholars who have definitely lesser less money in their open access funds can publish in open access, and it's kind of like, it's not forbidden, of course, to pay processing. Well, it wouldn't be a fee, but a donation. So I also asked my university, can we not donate money to open book publishers to increase the possibility to make this possible, because as a thank you also for publishing this book. So that's always a possibility, and also something very needed, because it is not for free, but there's no obligatory book processing fees, and the price, if you then everything is kind of like transparent, so they tell you what the price would be for the work that they do. It's all very transparent, democratic, and I really liked working with them. Okay, thank you. That was my part, my prepared part. Voila.
So if Josh and Lucy would like to join on screen, thank you, and lead our discussion, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Lucy, we didn't talk about who would go first, I think. Do you want me to start off and then roll on? Okay, since I'm talking already. Well, welcome everybody, and many congratulations to Bregt. This is such an amazing accomplishment, and I'm so fortunate to have been able to celebrate the release of the book with you back in March when it came out in person in Amsterdam. I was there like really fortuitously. And now to be here virtually with you to celebrate this through the launch. And also, I'm delighted to be back with you in Amsterdam starting tomorrow for a few days for the color conference at I. So I'm super privileged and super delighted to, celebrate with you again and again and again, because this is such an amazing accomplishment that's been simmering for a while. So as you've heard, Feeling Colour is such a remarkable work of media archaeology that traces concerns about color and embodiment through the material fabric of cinema at mid-century. It's an important and compelling account of color cinema and theory that is expansive while also centering its historical focus primarily on the mid-century and particularly from the 1950s into the 1960s. And as you've heard today, these are critical decades in the history of color cinema, given the immense technical changes that occurred as post-war cinemas increasingly turned to color, transforming global cinema from a primarily black and white medium into a color one. And Brecht's account of this period is innovative for the ways in which she thinks through both the technical innovations as well as the aesthetic and massive cultural changes going on during this period with color and through color and with so much that brings in. The breadth and depth of the book is amazing, while centering the historical changes in color technology and aesthetics of mid-century cinema. Brecht also addresses a range of longstanding issues in color studies, such as the relation of emotion and color, as you've heard, color and sensuality, color and psychology. And she traces the specific ways in which these topics were adapted and transformed through cinema of that era. The manuscript brings together both mainstream cinema, primarily Hollywood and European cinemas, and a range of experimental and psychedelic films, B-movies, and erotic works, as you've been hearing, from Barbarella to Daisies, and well beyond that. This is really just incredibly impressive in terms of the amount of material that you're able to kind of bring together, both theoretically and then also specifically through film history of this era. And I want to note in particular just your skill and precision in the close analysis that you've done of the film and media that you've analyzed in here. It's such a kind of major accomplishment and such a model of impressive, close formal analysis, as well as theoretical and cultural engagement. So let's see, just in terms of opening up some discussion here. I've been privileged to have known Brecht for over 20 years, and we've been talking about color and collaborating on color over these past 2 decades in such amazing ways. It's been super inspiring to me to have this amazing kind of relationship with Brecht around questions of color. So I wonder, Brecht, if you could situate just kind of the background of this project, how you came to it, and specifically to this focus on the post-war era, given your expansive work on color going back to the silent period, where we started off kind of talking about color and in particular about early cinema and the emergence of color, and then thinking about color in the 1920s through our collaborations there. I'm curious in particular about how the kind of focus on post-war color cultures took shape through your work with the ERC Film Colors project with Professor Barbara Flukiger, who we all know so well and are inspired by. How did that kind of work there kind of lead to the kind of genesis of this focus on post-war cinemas? And if you could just kind of take us back into this focus that you've taken up in that period in this project. So I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you. That's a great question. Yes, of course, the ERC project with Barbara Flukiger and so many others, the PhDs that were part of that project, and the PhDs that were part of another project that Barbara got in, then more on cultural perspectives on color cinema, etc., was of course kind of wanted to be about 100 years of color cinema, and then divided into various smaller periods. So for me, I think Barbara had in mind, she's not here, is she? No, but and maybe I can ask her when we are all in Amsterdam. She had in mind that I would write a book about 100 years and then emotions in color and cinema, which to me, I thought, well, I'm more kind of I like to kind of take that broadness of things, which would not work if I would use 100 years of cinema. Plus, for me, the historical context of films is an important one because it makes me curious, simply. So for me, this was also very important to kind of like to be able to grasp this color culture that these films were made in. I needed to limit myself, first of all. But then why not limit myself to the period that I was used to studying already, the early films that we studied together, and that, I also already started studying for my master's thesis when I also did an internship with Pathé and stuff. And then, of course, with the wonderful project you and Sarah kind of led, and that Vicky and I were so lucky to be part of, the color in the 1920s. And actually, it is your fault that I ended up in the 50s and the 60s, because the 20s kind of like inspired me so much to look at the 60s, because the 20s were also this kind of revolutionary time, like this interwar period where so much was happening, where also changes were happening, color revolutions were happening. And then in the 50s and the 60s, I recognized this. And it started with the size and the length of the dresses that Vicky and I started to study when we were kind of like looking at flapper culture and Colleen Moore and and how flappers were kind of like a first feminist, kind of like very inspiring period. And this kind of mirrored to the 60s, but of course never entirely. So this made me incredibly curious about this period. And then of course Sarah's amazing work on the Eastman color revolution also inspired me to start focusing more on this post-war period where so much was going on and where so many changes were happening, and basically kind of like the 20s post-war, First World War periods. Post-war periods are kind of interesting, I think, because so much is in movement. Yeah. Oh, and one more thing. Yeah, one more thing, the madness. I was very much already focusing on madness and the whole LSD hallucination. That also kind of like drove me to the 60s.
Well, I was going to turn it over to Lucy, but since you brought this up, just to kind of follow up, this was another question that I had about thinking about like hallucinatory color into what I know, knowing of your interest in neurodivergency and disability studies. Could you say just a little bit more there, kind of to talk about where you end in the coda on this book on hallucinatory colors, and in the part of it is part of this kind of broader interest that you have in neurodivergency, disability studies, and film and media. And then let's bring Lucy in after that.
No, that there's some amazing things that even also stuff that didn't end up in the book on basically this belief how color can either heal or can change your inner life. And in the 50s and the 60s, of course, this belief was very strong and also really connected to this LSD experience, for example. Timothy Leary starting to use LSD as an experience to kind of change your mind about society and become a different person, become a new person. And this we can find in these films. And also what I found so interesting was how people started to believe that only with kind of like reproducing these color experiences, moving colors with music, etc., these synesthetic experiences through like artwork, through expanded cinema, etc., how this alone would be kind of like healing in a way, kind of like changing your mind about society, becoming more or less strict and controlling, and starting to become the person for the future. This utopian idea about how these artworks with color and music and moving color and etc. would have the same influence as the use of LSD or whatever kind of incentive for this, the new humans from the 60s. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, congratulations on this incredible achievement. I very much echo Josh, and thank you, Josh, for giving such a beautiful kind of digest of what the book does so well. I mean, I think just to kind of echo that, like the incredible theoretical richness with that precision of analysis, the way that you kind of flesh out this kind of intertwining of history and culture and aesthetics and the sensory. So I guess like one thing that really struck me was, and I guess I'm kind of staying in this, like the shift between the 1950s and the 1960s, because I'm also kind of fascinated by that period. It really felt like what you were, in kind of positioning this aesthetic shift and the kind of patterns in aesthetics between film and industry and kind of theories about color is a kind of a shift in the sensory paradigm as well, of this kind of move from the kind of color control as you describe it, and the kind of regulation of color and the ways that regulates bodies, to the 1960s and kind of ideas of discomfort and pain and disgust kind of come up all the way through the book in relationship to the different ideas that you're kind of working through, and you kind of link that to this idea of kind of resistance that's kind of exploding in the 1960s. So I guess I was kind of interested in, if you have kind of more things that you want to say about this kind of sensory shift, and how looking at color really draws that out, because I feel like there's a kind of we can kind of understand that intuitively, but I think what the book does so beautifully is really kind of pinpoint where that shift is coming from and how it's expressed and how it might kind of act on the body.
Oh wow. That's a very rich and interesting question that might bring a new book. First of all, let me thank both of you for the compliments and the wonderful words, and that's really heartwarming. And I'm happy that the book is received in that way, because when you write it, you just have fragments and then you put them together, and then it brings this whole, apparently that's this interpretation, and that is really, really great. So the shift between the 50s and the 60s, from this controlling kind of neatness in a way, where colors are, the aesthetics of the colors are kind of like in these separated surfaces, this modernist kind of idea that also relates to the Bauhaus aesthetics, like kind of a non-mixture in a way for me, towards this opening up of the sensuous, and it's always difficult to find like why would that happen at that point. But it's most sure that, I found it fascinating that there is this simultaneously happening thing with opening up the sensuous and all these revolutions going on. And whether or not that is related to the fact that there was also a sexual revolution going on, for example, that is very much about opening up the mind and the ideas about what you can do with your body, and can you show it or not, and can you feel it, are you allowed to feel it, and like female orgasm, is that something that needs to be there, or is it just reproduction, whatever. And yeah, in combination with everything, yeah, I don't know. And of course, if there's going on so much, there's also, of course, the Vietnam War going on. If there's so much violence at the same time going on, I think there's a cross-modal thing when you see and experience. It's like what is happening now in maybe Gaza and in Ukraine. When you watch the news or hear people talk about it, you already have this cross-modal perception of that violence and death, and that must have also done something in the 60s when the Vietnam War was going on, and people felt so also it's a bit similar as to, from maybe I think from what we experience today, like this horrible helplessness and feeling of incompetence, but at the same, and it's strong feelings, and it's physical, it is very in the body, for me at least. I don't know if you recognize that, and maybe that we find back, we need to express in our art, in our cinema, and maybe that is why these films were made in this way, and this art was there at that time, like so sensuous and so also so much discussed. I don't know. Yeah, would be interesting to compare later this period to that. See what we do now in our art and cinema, and are we becoming more sensuous again?
See, I think we probably both have a couple more questions for you, Brecht, but also I should probably say at this point that we're also going to open things up to like further conversation, both kind of formal and informal questions and answers to everybody that's in this room. So if you have questions, be thinking about them. You're welcome to ask them over the Teams live over video. You're also welcome to put them into the meeting chat, and we can raise those for you as well if you'd rather type them out.
Absolutely.
But as everybody's maybe kind of thinking about questions and congratulations to Gift Brecht. Maybe I'll ask another question, and I know that I would imagine Lucy has more questions as well. But let me ask about to go back into film colors in the ERC project, and thinking specifically about the kinds of digital tools that you mobilized in this project. And like I've seen this through other people's work as well coming out of the ERC project. I'm thinking, of course, about Olivia Christina Stutz's work as well that mobilized Vian in particular. I'm curious about your use of those kinds of digital tools to open up questions about analog media at mid-century, and like how did you, in what ways were you using Vian, in what ways did that kind of open up new insights into this material, which is clearly there in the text, but I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit as well.
Yep. Well, to start, Vian was a whole kind of trajectory of discovery throughout the entire project, because at some points I had the feeling I had to learn how to work with a new tool every month, because it was so in development and so much changing all the time, the things that you could do, the things that you could not do, etc. So, and I always, have to think, but of course, what Vian did and what the use of these computational tools did was that we could find and trace for patterns in larger, in these 400 films. And of course, I kind of limited that then to the 50s and 60s, but still, that was quite an important amount. And from there, looking at kind of like what can we see here through kind of like what happens, what comes back regularly in these films, like for example food, or certain emotional things. Do the emotions raise throughout the films? Do the backgrounds become more colorful before or after 1960? questions like that they might have been asked yet already, but we could now also put them to the test and see if this really was what was happening in these films. And from there, I was able to also step outside of that corpus and look at other films that were from the same period, maybe showing similar topics, patterns, ideas, contrast, uses of contrast, etc. So in that way, like with also textual analysis, you can do so much more. You can find these patterns without just kind of like thinking, oh, I've watched all these films and it might have been that, but it's still kind of like from your viewing experience, whereas this is formalized into. However, on the other side, there's also, of course, many kind of like, problems with it, because it is still very subjective. You work with a big group of people on the same on one corpus, so there's kind of like, you have to make sure that not only you look at these films and how they can be labeled and categorized, but also somebody else maybe, and check whether or not things. So we did that in a playful way throughout the project, but still there's a lot of kind of like, it's never like nothing is ever objective, but there's a lot of subjectivity still in there, and choices made also by individual researchers. So that is also something that I learned, that using these computational tools is very much what did I say? I was distracted because there was a chat coming in. Using these tools also teaches you about the limits of it, and maybe also about what you might do in the future. So I'm still kind of like very much interested in using these tools for my new kind of work on the stigma questions. So in that way, it was a hard way, but it was interesting. And I think we all learned a lot, and we all also found our own ways through kind of working with this tool and discovering things. And then what I really, somehow you might say, okay, I can also see all these contrasts in the image when I look at it without the visualizations in Vian, but still I think that seeing the color space and then all of a sudden pop out one color in a completely different position in that color space makes it so much more clear what is going on. So for just one image, just to illustrate what happened when we were working with that. And then of course you can also compare all these films and see where saturated colors were used more in what period, etc. It's all very, very exciting, but mostly also, how the translation of one image into this color space with these kind of like, maybe showing that your intuition sometimes is right and sometimes isn't. It's also kind of like control for your intuition, probably.
Lucy, do you want to follow up? I think we have a question from Sarah, and then there's also a question from Liz in the chat. But I want to turn back to you first, in case you want to follow up with additional questions.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, thank you for asking about the Vian methodology, because I was kind of interested in that as well. And I think the book really uses the visuals of that in very effective ways. So you get a kind of sense of exactly what you were just kind of describing, of how that kind of situates your analysis. And I think also says something about the kind of precision of how you're able to analyze the color, of you kind of getting these maps of color and different hues and things like that. But I guess I was quite interested in asking a little bit about because as Josh described, the book is highly interdisciplinary, and kind of weaves together these kind of different approaches and different contexts. And the end of the book, you kind of situate that by kind of saying something about the kind of challenge of being an interdisciplinary, or taking this kind of interdisciplinarity, but also the value of it. And I wondered if you wanted to kind of reflect on that a little bit and say something about that value.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I must say that this interdisciplinary, I really felt the need to also dive into, for example, these physiological theories and the biological working of the eye and it took me a lot of time, but I thought, yeah, I have to dive into that because otherwise I can't say anything about this first layer of quasi-immobility and whatever. But I did notice that what you can do by yourself is so limited. And I can try, but I am most certainly not a psychologist or a biologist, or so I can use like their texts in which they explain their results, but I cannot check if it's right or whatever. And so that was quite a challenge. And I'm now kind of trying to really work more together with people who really know what they're doing, huh? Not that I don't know what I'm doing, but it's limited. And but this has other challenges because then you have to find kind of like a common language to do this collaboration and to do this working together the right way. And of course, during the project, we already experienced that because we had Giorgio Trumpi, who is a brilliant physicist, but it was obviously occasionally really difficult to kind of understand each other, and for him to understand what we were doing, for us to understand what he was doing, and to bring that together. And I noticed still that this keeps being a big challenge because people are so specialized, and it's really often hard to also make people understand what we are doing, and at the same time back try to understand what they are doing, and then find that common moment where you can really find something new, I think. But I still think it's of the highest importance, and because it just brings a lot of richness and different way of looking at our cultural objects, I think. Yeah. But also, I mean, my stepfather said, I mean, you can't do everything. It's this description of the book. It's like, Bregt can do anything. I said, no, I can't do anything. Come on. So he's a bit right. It's you have to take care of that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Why don't we turn it over to Sarah, and then we'll turn to Liz after that in the chat. So Sarah,
Okay.
are you okay? Perfect.
Yeah, great. Yes, that's such a lovely discussion here. And yes, thanks, Bregt, for the book, but of course, and for mentioning films like Modesty Blaise, the amazing Modesty Blaise, not often talked about, but it should be. Anyway, I was really intrigued by, of course, in earlier periods, we're always so sort of pushed and impelled to sort of try to understand the logic behind how colour is being used, and the classic systems of control that Technicolor had and all the rest of it. And I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about what happens now, obviously in your period, the 50s and 60s. Are there actually new forms of colour control emerging? Because I mean, my sort of sense is that it's not that they just go and there's absolutely nothing. It's no holds barred, anything goes. What are you able to discern, different ways of color control emerging at the level of production, perhaps, as these new systems and new processes and forms are being negotiated by big companies, and particularly in commercial cinema, there's a lot at stake. So what's happening in that terrain, do you think? I'd just be really interested in your views on that.
Just to make sure I understand you, what do you mean in the 50s and 60s or now?
I mean in the 50s and 60s. So
Okay.
when I meant now, I'm now in the terms of your book.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
in the period that you've studied, what is really happening with that whole domain? I know you mentioned decor and things like that, but what levels of control are trying to be promoted at the level of production, if any? Have you been able to discern?
Whoa. It's a difficult question because I would have to kind of now filter in my mind which ones are the commercially made ones and which ones are not.
Yeah.
And then of course lots just kind of mixes up, but and I think that is interesting as well, because of course you have thought a lot about the color control, the color consciousness, etc. Bye, Cloudy. Thank you.
Bye.
And the color control, but also always how also these regulations and rules or whatever are embedded in cultural contexts. So like you and Josh discussed, and also Rosina Blachnicz in the book discusses, it is always related to other industries, to other aesthetics at that moment. And I think in that perspective, you can say something about how the color control or the conditioning, etc., kept playing a role, but changing into another whole of color aesthetics from the 60s, of course, then, where all these things were going on. And I think and if we talk about the idea of color control and conditioning, the overarching idea, of course, is the same. It's color influences the human body and the human mind. Whether it's like, okay, we need to do this in a very controlled way and paint this blue and this red and this green so we can steer the human body and make it more productive or whatever in the industry, or and at that time, the other aesthetics was maybe more like fluidity in the colors and unleashing the colors, but still to kind of control that human body and that human mind. So this longer discourse about how color can be used to affect us or audience in the 50s is the overarching, and it just happens in these different forms, depending probably on larger cultural context from the moment. Like, when it's so popular to use color conditioning and the paint promoted by Biron, you trace that back in cinema, and also that idea of how color is used to steer the audience. And the same when the color culture changes so drastically, you also trace that back into the cinema. Yeah. I guess, is that an answer to what you were asking?
No, that's really interesting. No, thank you, Brett. No, it's a big conversation, but we can, it's great. Thank you. No, let other people
and what I also was thinking, the 50s, of course, is also post-war period, but why is it so controlled then? That is a question I would like to, that just came up in my mind, like why would, and why does it need to be so neat? Because of this huge destructive period before, but in the 20s we had the same. So what is the difference? Well, just questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
I mean, that may be something we take up more this coming weekend and week at I, but I think to some extent those kinds of controls, like in the 50s, are there because of perhaps the lab situation and the dispersal of new technologies of Eastman color and Agfa color and all the variants, that it's it's a slow rollout in its way, and
Yeah.
it's also coming out of the heritage of Technicolor control in certain ways. I mean, this is, hypothesis in many ways, but also stuff to be kind of dug into more about what
Yeah.
opens up there.
But interesting, because in a way, in a pas de deux, with this also attempt to put people back in under control in a way after that period of big destruction, combined with technology and also this kind of like shift from a cinema that turned black and white again and then back into color, kind of is simultaneous with this period from control and the companies and the Technicolor, etc., being in control towards like anything goes. It's so much more easy. It's so much cheaper. It's so easier to use, etc. That's interesting as well. Yeah, that it's just kind of like comes with also these periods of revolution. It's a beautiful coincidence, maybe. Yeah.
Maybe let's bring in my dog and a couple questions from the chat. Liz, I think, is up first. I guess maybe I'll read these. But so we have one from Liz so far, and also one from Alexandra Morlasova. So let me ask. I'll read Liz's question and comment that I know you can see, Bregt, but just for those of you who may not see the chat, Liz says, this is such an amazing book, and congratulations on a second open access monograph too. It's really exciting to hear you speak about color lighting today in relation to hallucination, intoxication, and contrasting colors. Liz has been looking at color lighting and social and moral values in Houston's Moulin Rouge recently, and wondered if there's more that you might like to say about color lighting, color contrast, and unpleasant colors as another dimension of the sensuous, joyous, pleasurable, etc., and then unpleasant within that. And then she says, for example, like the color lighting blue, red, green in the bar scene in Bachelor's Paradise. And she also notes that you write about Moulin Rouge in the book. So this question about the unpleasant, I think, is really on point there.
It's difficult to say what is unpleasant when and where. Because that's also it's also dependent on the color culture we live in, I guess. But of course, yes, I would maybe, in answering that, go back to for example, the Godard example and the Hitchcock example, where you have these successive contrasts of green and red, and building tension in an unpleasant situation, but also, kind of like building tension with the succession of these complementary colors, because red and green are, of course, very strong opposites, complementary colors. The one is not in the other, and the after image of the one is produced by the other. So it's just kind of like a strengthening situation. And that combined with what happens in a scene, if that is something that is unpleasant, then it becomes also strongly unpleasant. This becomes a stress factor in a way. On the other hand, when we think about I can, no, let's leave it at. Yeah. Is that, or do you want to elaborate a bit more on it, maybe, Liz? Or is this what you meant?
I'll just pop my microphone on. It was just to say that the readings of Van Gogh and Toulouse-Lautrec's work, where the contrasting colours are read as producing an unpleasant effect, is something that the colour design tries to pick up in Moulin Rouge. I was just thinking if there's a kind of that idea of the unpleasant as the obverse to those more pleasurable, sensuous things around joy, or in whether intoxication and lighting, whether lighting is used to give a sense of a moral judgment of value over the depicted subject in a scene.
Yeah.
That kind of question.
I guess, exactly. I guess the Godard example from Une femme est une femme in the toilet, where Anna Karina and what's his name, who dresses up as a monkey in another film, the very famous French actor, are in the bathroom, and then her husband is outside and thinks they are having sex, and you have this successive kind of effect of green and red. I think here's an example of how this creates unpleasantness now, and an unpleasant feeling also, kind of creating it in the body. I think the Giallo, the films, they play with this a lot as well. The Mario Bava films, with these colored lights and indicating, okay, this is strange, this is weird, this is horror, this is unpleasant from the beyond. Another one could be the example and that is also illustrated in the book with the War of the Worlds, where the alien dies, which is also illustrated by colored light now. I don't remember if it was the green where he's still alive. No, the green is dead and the red is still alive. So it's like the hand crawling out of the machine, and then the color changes and the creature is dead. So there's an unpleasant connotation, of course, also, although they are liberated from the animal, or from the alien, but it's still unpleasantness. Another one is the whole fascinating kind of culture of atomic and atomic waste, atomic explosions, danger, which is also often represented with colored lights. War in the World is the first example, of course, but also this strange German film that goes to Venus, and Venus has been destroyed by an atomic war, and the atmosphere is like unpleasant colored lights indeed.
Visualizing something
toxic.
Visualization of it.
Like the visualization of toxic.
And the idea of the after image.
Jump in very quickly. I saw a timer warning coming up a few minutes ago that we had 5 minutes left. Will we automatically be booted out, or are we able to be a little bit loose here on time?
I think we can run over a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes. But it's if you'd like to ask, I think that would be, if that's okay with Vicky, and it'd be good to ask Alexandra's question too.
Yeah. Should we take that? Let's take that one up, and then as maybe the final question, and then we'll be able to say goodbye, bring this to an end. Do you want me to read this again? Okay. So Alexandra says, congratulations. I was also amazed by such a deep dive into film colors I came across while I was researching on black color in photochemical film. I can't wait to read the whole book. I was wondering, as you mentioned, the notorious Czech film Daisies, Cedar Ramasky, it made a shift from Hollywood and Western European art cinema to the eastern side of the world, divided in this way. Do you spot any variations in the color space from aesthetic and material point of view due to geographical conditions? So beyond the tight temporal definition, is there any geographical territory marked out that you see in this era in terms of the material you're covering?
If you mean really in the color film material that is used, I find that difficult to answer. That would be maybe a question for Josefina Dieke, who really teased that out very well. In a cultural way, I can see But I would also like to throw that question back at you. If you see these geographical territory marked out, like in the color materials that were used, because it is such a fascinating and curious film, also in ways of using, I think, color filters to make these monochrome images, in ways of how the colors are separated at certain points to kind of like, again, illustrate their intoxication of beer, or the kind of like the feeling of separation when the trains leave. So yeah, fascinating. And I think this film, in a way, is something very unique, but not only because it's from Eastern Europe, but also because it seems to be from a woman in a position where she is basically not, it's not appreciated now that she does this. So it's even a stronger effect in that way, for me. The fact that that she was boycotted after this film, because she expressed herself in this way, makes it very significant. So I think there's more to the film than just an East-West question. Although, of course, the whole fact that they boycotted her because of this film, which, when you look at it, okay, it's about two Marys who are doing extremely naughty things, probably, but not necessarily reason to boycott. So that in itself might be Eastern-Western question. And also, of course, as many people who studied this film said, it was made in a context of hunger, of how do you call it, famine, lack of food. So the fact that they eat all the time and destroy like this expensive dish, yeah, it must have touched and make people very uncomfortable. But still, yeah, I would like to ask you, why do you think she was boycotted for this? And how do you consider this a geopolitical thing? Hello, Alexandra?
Hello.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Because I'm not sure I have a very good connection. But,
I can hear you.
Yeah, I think okay. I think I don't know much about this like reception that you mentioned, and also it makes me curious. I think it's rather this like very conservative paradigm, or that time that was not at all psychedelia, or what you have been mentioning about the time in the context of US culture, but it was, I think, the basis, it's 1960 or like maybe the first half, I'm not sure, but it, like the 50s and the beginning 60s, it was not so good in Czechoslovakia or like Eastern Europe. So I think it was kind of disrespectful towards some maybe artificial moral, and Chytilová is fighting this hypocrisy, and also, like as you were mentioning, that they had no food, and they were in this hotel, which was it's still there in Prague. I live really very close to this hotel, and it was used to host communist politicians, and there was all this volupté and like luxury, and they are somehow just reversing or mocking this representation, or like
yeah, I think it's a very rebellious film and full of radical gestures, playful gestures that were not allowed or not allowed to represent. I was just wondering about because in the Soviet or socialist bloc there were different materials, and also the colors feel different, and Daisies is very specific example, as you also mentioned, and this collaboration, this close collaboration with the cameraman and photographer Jaroslav Kuchera, who himself was an experimenter, but in a different conditions, I would say, because everything was state film, and there was not some kind of underground or like some. I'm sorry, I think you hear more than you need to.
No, I hear you.
Yeah, there are like kids crying all around.
No, I didn't hear your kids.
Okay, I'm sorry. No, that I was wondering also that in Soviet Russia there were a lot of experiments in the color film, and some cameramen that were preparing the film stock before shooting in very specific way, like in a painterly way, and if I can somehow try to collect my impression from the socialist films, the color rendition, it's quite different from like this crispy Kodak stock, and like, you know, I was thinking also about the emotional impact on based on different materialities. And yeah, yes. Sorry, I was long. Thank you very much.
No. It's a really interesting question, and I am very, very sorry that I cannot really dig into that right now, because I did not look at the original print of the Daisies film, which would be amazing to do, because it might enable us to discover so much more. I was basically attracted by the film because of the whole food theme, and because I knew it, of course, and it's a film that was very well received in the Netherlands, for example, and in the West, basically. So maybe that's also why we know this film so well. I know that it was distributed by the feminist distributor in the Netherlands, Cinemine, for example. But I think to really say something about this, we need to look at the archival prints and look at the material maybe before, and because my impression still also is that this film is very visceral and very sensuous. It talks to the senses in a way, maybe not through the hallucination theme, but still. So yeah, might there be also there a connection to kind of like, and of course you had your own revolutions going on, but still also all these discourses about the liberation of women and I imagine that must have been also well known in Eastern Europe. I'm sure, I know. And maybe that also made the powers the powers that were at that time, the Communist Party, even more kind of cautious about this film. The fact that they might want to kind of avoid such a revolution, and then made her silent by boycotting her films or by forbidding her to make films. But yeah, the film is fascinating, and we can talk maybe for hours about this film. I don't know if are you from the archive?
No, I'm a filmmaker, and I'm also a bit researching, but rather in the field of photochemical experimental film.
Wonderful. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Have a nice weekend.
Yeah.
Well, I think Daisies is such a kind of fantastic film to kind of end on for today. And as you said, there's so much more that we should look into with that work, and
yeah.
there's so much to talk about with it.
We
But
could do a
these
book
questions
about daisies, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. But these questions about like regional specificities, national specificities, global differences, I think is one of the things that's at the center of the conversation at I this coming week, about kind of thinking about global differences, about how color developed and was taken up and received and produced in a very variety of national contexts. And that question, I think, is very fundamental to maybe, the kind of state of color studies these days in film and media, about like really thinking difference globally in these ways, and also relationality.
Yeah, exactly. Both, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
With that said, I think we are about 10 minutes over, and I would love to kind of keep talking, and we will be able to keep talking, at least some of us, this weekend and beyond. But again, many congratulations, Brecht. This is such an accomplishment.
Thank you.
And I'm so delighted to have it in hand and to be able to talk about it with you. And thank you to everybody who organized this, Vicky and Liz, and Lucy as well, for joining us today for this fantastic conversation.
Thank you all. Thank you.
No, thanks for having me.
Is there anything else,
Yeah.
Liz, to take us off? Oh, absolutely. Okay. Well, maybe we should call it there then. Okay.